My husband's affair woman walked into his hospital room and demanded his house, money, and accounts. So I let her take everything, including his debts. I was sitting at Julian's bedside on the second day when a woman I had never seen pushed the door open and announced that she was his wife. I said that I was his wife. She looked me up and down, set her bag on the chair like the room already belonged to her, and said, "No, I am his wife. I do not know who you are, but you need to leave." She said it loud, and she said it certain. And that was how I learned my husband had been running a second life, and that the second life had arrived in heels, ready to collect. She moved fast. She told the nurses I was confused and should not be there. She asked about his condition as though she were the only person in the building who mattered, and because she was the loudest and the surest, half of them believed her. She turned to me and said, "Family only, family only," in the room where I had been sleeping upright in a plastic chair for 2 nights. She started making calls, telling whoever answered that she was at the hospital with her husband, and that everything was going to be handled. She meant the money. Within an hour, she was asking a nurse whether he had everything in order, whether the house was taken care of, what the accounts looked like. She asked right in front of me. As his wife, I handle all of this now, correct? And when the nurse glanced between us, unsure, she said, "Do not look at her. She is nobody. Talk to me." Again, she had a way of saying it that made staff fall into line, because she behaved as though doubting her were the crazy option, not the fact that 2 women were standing over 1 man both claiming the same title. She got worse the longer she stayed. She told me she was the real one, that he loved her, that they had a future planned, that I was the one he settled for. She said, "I do not know what you thought you had, but this is mine now. The house, all of it." She wanted to be the one the doctor spoke to, the one who signed for his care, the one holding his keys and his accounts and his whole life, and she pushed for every piece of it, hard, in front of everyone. She kept circling the same questions. Did he own the house outright? What was in savings? Was anything set aside? She asked whether he carried life insurance, and she asked it while he lay right there breathing. In the same breath, she used to say how much she loved him. She told me, "You should be grateful I am taking this off your hands. Someone competent should manage his estate." His estate. She said the word like it was a locked chest, and she wanted the key badly enough that her hands were already open. She kept telling me I did not know him the way she did, and she was wrong about that in the worst possible way for her, because I knew exactly who he was, and she did not know the first thing. Here is what she did not know. For a year I had been finding out, one envelope at a time, that the man in that bed was drowning. The house had been borrowed against until there was nothing left inside it, and the payments were crushing. The cars were leased with balances he could not cover. The cards were maxed to the ceiling. There were loans stacked on loans, and the people he owed had started calling me because they could not reach him. He had been funding 2 entire lives on borrowed money, hers and mine, and the borrowing had finally run dry. I had learned it the slow way, the way you learn anything a liar does not want you to know. A collector called the house looking for him and used a number I did not recognize. A letter arrived in a plain envelope with a due date circled in red. I started opening things addressed to him, which I had never done in 11 years, and once I started, I could not stop, because every envelope contained a smaller version of the same disaster. I had spent months bracing to walk away from a sinking ship, and now here was a woman standing over his bed insisting the ship was hers. So I let her have it. When she demanded to be the one in charge, to sign for everything, to take over his affairs and his accounts and his keys, I stepped back and let her. She thought I was surrendering a fortune. I was handing her an anchor and calling it a gift. She signed for all of it, thrilled, certain she had beaten me to something valuable. She took the accounts. She took the keys to the house and the cars. On her way out, she looked at me and said she got the better end, that she almost felt sorry for me, and she meant it. Then the bills started. The house was worth far less than what was owed on it, with payments that were now hers. The leases still had money owing on everyone. The accounts she had grabbed were empty, then worse than empty, overdrawn and climbing. And every person he owed, all the ones circling in the dark for months, suddenly had a name and a face to hand paper to, because she had stood in a hospital in front of a whole floor of witnesses and declared herself the wife who was handling everything. Every loan, every card, every phone call turned and pointed straight at the woman who fought so hard to be recognized as his. Weeks later, she came back. I opened my front door and she was standing on the step, and she looked nothing like the woman from the hospital. That day she had been polished, hair done, voice like a weapon. Now her mascara was smudged under both eyes, her clothes were creased, and her hands were balled into fists at her sides. She had pounded on the wood hard enough that I thought it would crack. "You knew," she said, and her voice broke on it. "You knew what you were handing me, and you smiled and let me take it." Her nails were chipped, which sounds like nothing, except this was a woman who had walked into that room looking like she owned the world. I leaned on the doorframe and looked at her and felt nothing soft at all, because I remembered every word she had said to me over that bed. "You told me I was nobody," I said. "You told the nurses I was confused. You took the pen out of my hand and signed your own name. I did not hand you anything. You grabbed it." She blinked, and for a second she had no answer, and then she changed. Her shoulders dropped, her palms came up, her voice went soft. "Look," she said. "We were both played. He lied to both of us. We are on the same side here. If we work together, we can push all of it back on him. Julian ran up those cards. Julian took those loans. Why should either of us pay for what he did? And I will be honest, because there is no point telling this if I am not. For 1 second, I almost felt the pull of it. 2 women standing in the wreckage of the same man. It sounded fair. It almost sounded like sense. But Mackenzie had been sitting on my couch the whole time. And Mackenzie was not the sort of friend who watches you walk into a trap with a coffee in her hand. She stepped into the doorway behind me. "Do not fall for this," she said, flat and certain. "She called you nobody in front of a room full of people. She is not your sister. She is here because the first round of bills hit and she cannot breathe." Whatever spell had been forming broke apart, and I felt it snap like waking out of a dream where you almost said yes to something stupid. Armita's eyes went to Mackenzie, and the soft act fell off her face so fast it was almost funny. "Fine," she said sharp again. "Then I will find a lawyer and prove you tricked me. You let me sign knowing it was worthless. That is fraud." She said the word like a weapon she had been saving. I did not raise my voice. "You walked into a hospital, told everyone you were his wife, demanded his accounts, and signed papers in front of witnesses," I said. "Nobody made you do any of it. You fought for it." She opened her mouth and closed it again, because there was no answer to that and she knew it. Every nurse on that floor had heard her. She had shoved shoved her way to the front of the line and demanded to be first, and now she was first. First for every bill and every collection call Julian had been running from. She backed off the step, and at the bottom she turned and threw one last line over her shoulder. "This is not over. I will find a way to make you carry this with me." Then her tires marked the pavement and she was gone. And I stood in the doorway understanding that a woman who takes over a dying man's life in under an hour does not hear no and go home. She hears no and starts planning. I locked the door behind her and stood in the hallway with my hand still on the deadbolt, listening to the sound of my own house, and I understood that whatever came next would not arrive as another shouting match on a porch. It would arrive quietly, on paper, with someone else's signature at the bottom of it. Mackenzie said it out loud before I could. "She is going to go after Julian next. She is going to try to get him to say you were supposed to stay on those accounts." She was right, because Julian was still in that bed, still talking, and still the kind of man who told the last person in the room whatever they wanted to hear. I went back the next day, not for him, to find out what story the two of them were about to build. He looked smaller. The man who used to fill a room had gone thin and gray against the blanket, and when he saw me his face crumbled like a wall that had held as long as it could. "I am so sorry," he said. "I never meant for any of this. I stayed at the foot of the bed. I did not sit. I did not set my bag down. I did not come for sorry," I said. "Are you going to tell her I was supposed to stay on those accounts?" And he hesitated. That was the whole man in one pause. He never had a fast no. He had a look to the side while he worked out which answer cost him least. "She has been calling," he said finally. "Every day. Sometimes twice. She says if I tell people you were supposed to handle the finances, she can get out of the paperwork she signed. She wants me to say you abandoned your responsibilities." He said it like a weather report, like it was happening to him and he had no part in it. "And what did you tell her?" His eyes went to the window. "I told her I would think about it." That was Julian's way of saying yes without saying it, buying time until the pressure won, and it always won. I took one step closer so there was no chance of him claiming later that he had not heard. "If you lie for her," I said, "every person in your family finds out what you did. Your mother, your brother, not just the affair, the money, the second life. I have every statement, every overdue notice, every maxed card with your name on it." His eyes went wide, and I watched him understand, in real time, that I had not spent the year crying quietly in another room. I had been printing, saving, photographing. There was a folder in my house thicker than anything she could assemble, and his name was on every page. "You would not," he said, and his voice tipped up at the end, trying to make it a fact. "Try me." I let it sit. I wanted him picturing his mother reading those statements, his brother seeing the card he opened to pay for dinners and trips and gifts for a woman who was not his wife. Quiet is not forgiveness. Quiet people collect things. I left without saying goodbye, and I was halfway across the parking lot when I saw her coming the other way, moving fast, carrying a manila folder stuffed thick and held against her chest with both hands. She had dressed for this. We stopped about 20 feet apart between the rows of cars, and she chose the smirk. "Visiting your ex-husband? He is not my ex yet," I said. "And whatever is in that folder, he just told me everything you have been asking him to do." The smirk came off her face like something pulled. Her knuckles went white around the edges of the folder. "He would not tell you that. You are bluffing." I shrugged and put my hands in my pockets. "Go in and ask him." Then I walked past her and did not look back. Sitting in my car with my hands on the wheel, I watched her in the mirror, still frozen in the same spot, staring at the doors. And that was when I understood that this had stopped being about debt. She was not trying to hand me bills anymore. She was trying to rewrite what happened in that room. She wanted a signature, a statement, one piece of paper saying the story had gone differently than it did, and she had a man in a bed with no fight left in him. I needed proof of what she had actually said and done that day, and I needed it faster than paperwork moves. Mackenzie met me at my driveway. We went back and found the nurse who had been at the desk that morning, and she recognized me before I finished a sentence. "I remember the whole thing," she said, keeping her voice low. "Everyone on the floor does. That woman made a scene people talked about for days. She could not write me a statement," she said, and I could see she meant it and was sorry for it, but she leaned in and gave me a thread to pull. "Everything that happens in a room like that goes in the notes. Who visited, who signed in, who made demands about accounts and care. It is all documented." Mackenzie's cousin, a lawyer, listened on speaker in the stairwell and told us hospital records could take a week or two through the proper channels. A week was a lifetime. So we went back down to the front desk and asked for the visitor log, and the young receptionist pulled the binder without much fuss, and I ran my finger down the page and found it. Armida had not signed her own last name. She had written Mrs. O'Neill in neat blue ink, and in the relationship column she had written one word: spouse. She had committed the lie to paper before she ever reached his room, before the nurses, before the chair, before she looked at me and decided I was nobody. I asked for a copy, and the receptionist said she would need a supervisor, and the supervisor was gone until the afternoon, and I stood at that counter watching the secondhand crawl and feeling every tick of it belonged to her. Everything I needed moved at the speed of forms. Everything she was doing moved at the speed of a phone call. Then my phone rang in the parking lot, and it was Floyd, an old friend who used to work alongside Julian before he changed companies. He had heard about the hospital and something had been bothering him. "A woman came to his office last month," he said. "Told the front desk she was his wife, said she needed to clear out his desk. She had a key to the drawer so nobody questioned it. She took a box of his things, financial files, loan documents, account printouts, the kind of paperwork he kept there because he did not want it at home, in and out in 15 minutes. My grip tightened on the phone. She had held his numbers for weeks before she ever stood over his bed. She knew about the maxed cards. She knew the house was hollow. She walked in knowing all of it and fought for it anyway, which meant the debt was not a surprise. It was a price she had already agreed to pay. "There is one more thing," Floyd said, quieter. She told the receptionist Julian had asked her to pick up the life insurance folder. Asked for it by name. The receptionist remembered because it was odd, and she had to find it in a different cabinet. The woman put that one in her bag, separate from the box. I went cold in the way where everything gets very quiet and very clear at once. She had never come for the house. The house was bait, the accounts were smoke, and the policy was the prize. The only way to collect on it without a single question was for an entire hospital floor to have already watched her be the wife. The lawyer called back that night with the rest. Julian had changed the beneficiary 4 months earlier. Armida Stover, sole beneficiary. My name was nowhere on it. He had done that while he was healthy, while I was still washing his clothes and telling myself we were in a rough patch, and legally a man may name whoever he likes. I sat on the floor with my back against the cabinet under the sink for a long time after that, thinking about how easy it would be to simply stop. That is where Mackenzie found me. She did not ask if I was all right. She stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said, "She wins if the story she told at that hospital is the one that sticks. You and I both know it is not the real story. Get up." So I got up, and I called the lawyer back and told him everything. Floyd's call, the office visit, the folder requested by name, and when I finished, he asked me one question that stopped me completely. Were they actually married? I stood there with the phone against my ear and had no answer. She had said it in the room. She had said it to the nurses. She had written it on the sign-in sheet. She had said it so often and so loudly that I had simply accepted it. And so had everyone else, because she behaved as though doubting her were the crazy option. I had never once checked. "If there is no certificate with her name on it," he said, and his voice sharpened, "then she represented herself as a spouse to a medical facility to obtain his records and his accounts. She signed under a status that does not exist. That changes everything." The county records office opened at 8. Mackenzie and I were in the parking lot before 7 with gas station coffee, saying almost nothing, because there was nothing left to say until we had it. I asked the clerk for any marriage record filed under Julian O'Neill in the last 5 years. She typed. The screen took a few seconds, and those seconds stretched out long, and then she turned the monitor toward me and pointed. One result, one certificate on file, my name, my signature, my date. She searched the surrounding counties one by one, and every single one came back empty. No record anywhere of a marriage between Julian O'Neill and Armida Stover. The clerk checked twice because I asked her to, and then a third time with the spelling changed, and then she checked under Stover on its own in case something had been filed in reverse. Nothing. She said it the way clerks say things, plainly, without any idea what she was handing me. There is no record of that. She was never his wife. She had never been close to it. She was a girlfriend who chose a role and performed it so loudly that she signed legal documents standing on ground that did not exist. I asked for a printout of every search, and when the clerk handed the pages over, my hands were shaking, not from fear. I was long past fear. They were shaking from the sheer weight of what that woman had built against herself. She had announced a lie in a building full of cameras and people whose entire job is writing things down. The nurses had documented her. The sign-in sheet had preserved her handwriting. She had wanted to be unforgettable that day, and she had gotten her wish. I drove to the hospital one last time and walked past the hallway to his room without looking down it. I went to the administration office on the first floor, sat across from a man with a name badge and a serious face, and laid it all out. That a woman had falsely identified herself as a patient's spouse, that she had used the claim to reach his medical information and his accounts, that she had pushed out his actual legal wife, that she had signed paperwork under that claim, and that there was no certificate anywhere with her name on it. I put the county printouts on his desk, neat and in order, the way you hand someone something when you want it taken seriously. He read every page fully before turning to the next, and when he finished, his face had changed into something tighter and more alert, the face of a man realizing this was no longer a family argument. "We will need to pull the security footage and the nursing notes from that day," he said. "Please do," I said. She made sure everyone heard her. That evening she called. Her voice was not loud and not sharp. It was tight, the voice of a person working very hard not to come apart. "What did you do?" "I told the truth," I said. "You should have tried it." A pause, and then the thin edge again. "Julian will back me up. He will tell them we were married. He can tell them whatever he wants. There is no certificate. There is no record. There is nothing anywhere with your name on it except a pile of debt you signed for." The silence that followed went on longer than any silence she had ever permitted, because she was not a woman who allowed them. And then she spoke again, quieter, almost to herself. "He told me he was going to marry me. He said the paperwork was done. And for 1 second I heard it. The woman underneath, the one who had also been lied to. Julian built houses out of words and let people move in, and when they collapsed, he was already down the road. But she had taken his lies and sharpened them into a plan, and the plan ran directly over me. He lied to both of us," I said. "The difference is I stopped believing him. You built everything on his word, and his word was never worth anything." Then I hung up, and I opened my contacts, and I blocked his number. Mackenzie sat across the table from me with her hands around a mug that had gone cold an hour before. The insurance company had been notified. The hospital was pulling footage. Somewhere out there was a woman holding a stack of bills signed under a name that had never legally been hers, and every bit of that investigation had begun the moment she opened her mouth in a room she had no right to stand in. She lit her own fuse, on purpose, loudly, in front of everyone, because more than anything she wanted to be seen. 2 chipped nails on a cold mug, and outside, the street lamp buzzing over an empty curb.